so emotional. Don't let anyone try to tell you that it's not personal. It's not personal. You're only human. You're feeling overwhelmed right now.
Hello, Elmont Library. It's Manpreneur. It's Black History Month. We have a special interview for you today. Today we are with Mr. Andrew Jackson, also known as Sekou Molefi Baako.
Excellent.
Um, he is a librarian with stamina, 35 years, has executive director at the Langston Hughes Community Library and Cultural Center in Queens, New York. He's a professor of Black Studies, professor of library science at York College in Queens, New York. He's a member of the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. And his latest, which is kind of a replay, he's been reappointed as a trustee to the Board of Trustees at Queens College. And Mr. Jackson, let's start right there real quick. You are reappointed. What is a board of trustees? What does it mean to be at Queens College as a trustee? And you told me you was the first librarian ever appointed to the board of trustees.
Right. And let me clarify that. First librarian, first former staff person appointed to the Board of Trustees of the Queens Library, not Queens College, but the
Okay.
Queens Public Library. That is special because I've been a staff member for 36 years before I retired, and being on the Board of Trustees means that you are there for those that develop some of the policies and designs for the library system, and having a voice in the profession on some of the decisions that are made about the library, and being able to represent the voices of librarians and people who are employees. Being a voice on the Board of Trustees is a unique experience, but also very rewarding, because you see things from the top down as opposed to seeing things from the middle or
Yes.
bottom up. And that's a very special. It also is a sign of recognition by the borough president, Melinda Katz, at that time, for the contributions that I'd made to Queens Library, to the borough of Queens, and to my profession, to be recognized sufficiently enough so that at the time you get ready to retire, they don't say, okay, well, thank you for all those years of service. Here's your gold clock. Go sit in the corner and don't bother us. So that's very special. I feel privileged to be in that position.
Definitely, I want to say congratulations again. Like you said, it's important that we have ourselves at certain tables to give that input and oversight. And a lot of times, the Black community is stuck at the bottom of the table, maybe outside of the room where the table is at. We just can't get in the room. So always have to get off zero. I tell people, get off of zero. That's the first step. Let's get to number one. And you was able to do that for that next librarian to have goals and dreams. So thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you for representing. I love Queens Library. Um, so I definitely want to welcome you to our interview with Elmont Library. If you'd like to introduce yourself to our audience, we're geared toward the young adults, but this is for everyone. If you could give us a brief introduction of yourself and tell us about who you are.
All right. Again, my name is Andrew Jackson. My African names, I have actually 7 African names, but the first 3 that I was given in 1994, Sekou, Molefi, Baako, really represent the transition that I made from just being a regular African American to being an American of African ancestry, who celebrates and reads, as you can tell from the library behind me. This is my home library, that I'm always constantly doing research on Black history and Black culture, to have a better understanding of who our people were prior to coming to America, but also what we've accomplished since we've been here, even under the conditions of enslavement. And I think one of the most significant things in past history is the development of the Black Lives Matter movement, and how it has opened up the conversation, and it's
Yes.
and opened up the exposure of what it means to be in a continued state of disequity, being ignored, being invisible in a society that we helped create, and a country that we helped create, even during those years that we were enslaved. The conversation has moved forward. I was talking somebody yesterday in a Black History talk that this Black Lives Matter movement is a continuation of the civil and human rights movement that I was a part of in the 1960s. And that gap was a period when things just were let down and closed off. But this conversation has moved forward in such a short period of time that
Yes.
government and schools and businesses and people of stature and the LeBron Jameses and the Kaepernicks and the people that are wearing names on the back of their helmets and T-shirts that honor Black Lives Matter and all lives matter, but all lives cannot matter if Black lives don't matter. And it's important that the voice of our young people continue to be heard today, because it was the young children and the teenagers and the college students of the civil rights period that moved the civil rights movement forward in the 1960s as well.
I agree. Well said. Well said. Today is Super Bowl, and our fight for equality, Colin Kaepernick, who you just mentioned, the quarterback from San Francisco 49ers, who basically was blackballed out of the league and not given a chance, even though his accomplishments merited a chance to even be a second string, a backup, or even a third string, even though teams don't do that anymore. And, today, I love football. My son loves football. And for the past 3 years, we've been in a conflicted state of not supporting football or doing what my son loves. So we stayed away from watching too much NFL to send our own individual message, because I believe even one person can send a message if they're consistent with it. And today is one of those days where a lot of Black folks and those who support Colin Kaepernick are going to send a message by not watching the Super Bowl, by not contributing dollars to the bottom line of a league that wasn't fair and equitable. So Super Bowl Sunday, let's see what happens today.
There's also it evidently doesn't seem to be widespread, but I received something through the listserv for the Black Caucus of the American Library Association that there's also a petition being circulated to force the Kansas City football team to take the name of the Chiefs out of their name, just as Washington Redskins took the name out of theirs. That's overdue as well. When you look at the history of America and how it has treated all persons of color through the time that this country was formed. The Native American, they stole their land, they abused them and misused them, put them on reservations, made treaties that they broke consistently, and wiped out civilizations. Asians who were brought here to build the railroad, the Midwest, which was predominantly the land of the Mexican territories, all the way going up to Utah, was mistreated, and even those who remained here in the United States that were supposed to be citizens were treated as second class citizens and with no rights.
Crazy.
African Americans don't receive citizenship rights until the 13th, 14th, the 15th Amendments to the Constitution after the Civil War. Slavery was supposed to end in 1808, according to the Constitution. It didn't end legally until 1865 with the end of the Civil War, but then it continued through Reconstruction, through other new forms of slavery, as Michelle Alexander documented in her book. This country is founded on racism and institutionalized racism. So the fact that Black Lives Matter is now bringing it to the forefront, and it's causing many cultures to sit back and take a look and say,
Yep.
folks aren't crazy. They're not screaming and yelling for no reason. It's not an isolated incident that Ahmaud Arbery was killed, or George Floyd or Breonna Taylor was killed. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed over the years, and nobody's paid attention to it. So
Nope.
now people are starting to listen, and they're saying, wait a minute, look at what happened. This is on national television. It's not the first time.
Nope.
But it's time that now the question is, how far will this discussion go, and what will come out of this discussion? Where will it take us? What progress can be made to make sure that equity and people are treated equally in society, going back to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States that declares these things? When will America live up to these things? And this is important, particularly after the last 4 years that we faced under the
Yes.
administration of 45. I don't call his name, but the 45th president, what's happened during that administration, where people have been empowered to be hateful and empowered to act on that hate and abuse and kill people at random and at will. It's time for that to change. The only way that can change is not through legislation. You can change the laws, you can't legislate behavior. And this is what has to change. So that's part of what this whole movement is about, and what the celebration of Black History Month is needed for, is not just as the shortest month of the year, but as a reminder of who we are,
Mm,
what we are, and where we come from, and where we still have to go.
I so agree. So just to pivot a little bit, 35 years as executive director of Langston Hughes Community Library and Cultural Center. Tell us, how did that journey begin, and how did you weave your way through 35 magnificent years of leadership?
Well, in actuality, the taking on that job at Langston Hughes back in 1980, when I accepted it as a non-librarian, I have to point that out, um, was in some ways an accident. I was out of work. I was looking for work, and my background, my activism as a teenager and youth in the community of Corona Elmont, which is my home community. The elders on the board at Langston Hughes Library asked me would I apply for the job. I've been majoring in business at Baruch College. My experience in activism, my familiarity with the community, and my familiarity with the community as a resident, they thought that would be a good fix for the position. Uh, I came there in 1980 and then went back to school to finish up my undergraduate degree. And instead of going back to Baruch College, I was in Queens, so I decided to register at York College. The first class I took was Introduction to Black Studies 101. And that course changed my life. That was a life changer. The combination of taking Black Studies and being exposed to history that I'd never heard before, never been taught before, never experienced through my school years, and the combination of working at Langston Hughes Library, which was the Black Heritage Reference Center for Queens County. And it housed the largest
Wow.
circulating Black Heritage collection of any public library in New York State. And from my assessment with the collection that's there, and my years of working with libraries around the country, the largest circulating Black Heritage collection of any public library in the country was right there at Langston Hughes Library. That
Mm,
I spent my hours doing research and study and absorbing as much of the material out of the book collection at the library. The combination of working in a Black library, serving a Black community, creating programs and services for that Black community of Queens County and beyond, and taking that Black Studies class has opened up a door that is never closed, has given me a platform to speak from, and going into schools, talking to students, going to correctional systems, and talking to brothers and sisters, churches, community groups, anywhere that people would want me to speak, gave me that platform. And now, as a professor of Black Studies, I now have classes in Black Studies that I enlighten students on a regular basis about the history and culture of this country, but also the connectedness with the history we have in Central South America, the Caribbean, going back to Europe, and of course, our motherland, Africa.
yes. You hear that, everybody? Langston Hughes Community Library Cultural Center. Look it up. Ask Google, ask Siri. Look at that rich history that is there, and that Mr. Grant was able to help build up, and keep going. And we appreciate you for that once again. Um, I've never been there, which is a shocker, but I'm going to make it there in 2021.
It is still a unique library. In fact, the model of Langston Hughes Community Library and Culture Center, has been a model that has changed the profession. Um, Prior to our creation in 1969, libraries traditionally were based on book circulation, um, not programs and services, not information services. not an after school homework program, and definitely not a cultural arts program as a connection. And when Langston Hughes was created, it was created by the Black community of Caroni-Selmhurst to be a Black branch of the Queens Public Library, because there were no libraries in the borough that had any programs or services that related to the Black experience. The residents in the community demanded that we have a library that it be in the heart of the Black community on Northern Boulevard, which is our 125th Street, and that it focused on books and materials about the Black experience, and that it hire staff from the community that
Mm.
community. It hire young people to be tutors in the homework program to benefit the children in the community, which is primarily a Black community at that time. And that our focus was to transform non-readers and non-library users into readers and library users. And that meant that you had to do it what we call uh, mimicking Malcolm's words, through any means necessary. You couldn't just do it through the book. If we were non-readers because of our legacy of not being legally able to read, not having, and particularly not having books that were written about our stories, or books that focused on who we were and what we had accomplished in history. We've been exposed to white history all our lives, but we had not been
All
exposed.
my lives.
So most children, as I did, ask questions. How come we don't ever learn anything about what we did in history? And we were told, I was told, Carter G. Woodson was told, John Henry Clark was told, you don't have any books on your history because you didn't do anything in history. That's a lie. That's a pure out lie. So the need for having a library like Langston Hughes set the tone for what libraries should be, serving communities for the masses that were not part of the majority culture, which is the white culture in America. And since we did it through any means necessary, it means that we created an arts program. So the arts became a mean for drawing people into the library. Workshops and journalism and dance and
Mm.
writing and videography and photography became ways of drawing people into the library. And then we could show them people who had accomplished things in those areas and show them the reflection of themselves in the library. And they could go to the library and they could see a Black face on the cover. That would attract their attention. So we would do things like books on the shelves appeared on the shelves like this, the binder of the book. That doesn't make you want to read the book, but you turn the cover around and you start seeing Black faces on the book. You want to know what's inside that cover. And that's the way we started marketing books. That changed the whole marketing scene for books. It's a new marketing tool to put books face out so people can see the cover of the book instead of the spine of the book. We were doing things like the Dewey Decimal System used to drive me crazy when I was in the library. Decimal system is something that's an internal source to help us get the books back on the shelves where they belong. So why not make it a fun thing for children when they come to the library? We translated the Dewey Decimal System into a color coding system. So that you say, go to the red section, you'll see books on so-and-so. Go to the green section, you'll see books on so-and-so. Go to the blue section, you'll see books on so-and-so.
Mm.
So after a while, kids got used to the idea, and then they basically would get to learn the system through color, but also through the numbers. When we took out the numbers and put it in a traditional Dewey Decimal System, it didn't affect students at all or people at all because they got used to using the library.
That is amazing. I love that idea and how you transformed that.
We circulated comic books before they were called graphic novels. That there is a series of, I'm trying to see if I can find mine on the shelf here. I don't see it right now. There's a series of Black Heritage comic books. That was a series when we were in the 70s that focused on the kings and queens of Africa. And we would circulate those to get children interested in reading and seeing themselves in graphic novels. And we would go to meetings and people would say, the comic books, we don't circulate comic books. You know, we don't do those things in libraries. And we said, we mean you don't do things like that in library. We're doing it, and look at the circulation we're getting. Look at the people that come into the library. We altered the profession. So that little storefront library on Northern Boulevard changed the way libraries do business with their communities. And the new concept of graphic novels is just taken from the Black Heritage comic books that we circulated in the 1960s. So the programs and activities that I inherited in like I said, the library opened up in 1969. I arrived there in 1980. But from the period of 1980 through the 2016, when I retired, my responsibility was to grow the library and develop it into a more exposed library, a greater library, a more prominent library, and build the collections and programs and services. And that's what I did over my 36 years. Um, we went from a little storefront building to the magnificent facility that it is on 100th Street and Northern Boulevard. Was it 26,000 square feet building? We were in a 12,000
Wow.
storefront with an outdoor courtyard, a basement with 2 program rooms, a performance auditorium, an art gallery, and the circulating floor with collections that still expose people with over 45,000 volumes of print and non-print material on the Black experience. So Langston Hughes Community Library and Culture and is alive and well, and I just am honored that I had a opportunity as a non-librarian who became a librarian. I went back to graduate school. I graduated from York College with my undergraduate degree in 1990. I went back to Queens College, Graduate School of Library and Information Studies, to get my master's degree in library science. And in some cases, that legitimized what I was doing in the profession.
Mm.
People would hear the things that I was doing and say, where'd you get your degree? And I would tell them I just had an undergraduate degree. And then when they find out I wasn't a librarian, the meaning would change. Like, you're not a librarian, but I wanted to be part of the profession. I wanted to be an integral part of the profession. So I went and got my library science degree. And the people that inspired me, one of them was Dr. E.J. Josie, who was an activist librarian who worked up in Albany with the State Library of New York. He was a head of the library science program at University of Pittsburgh. And he constantly would talk to me about becoming a librarian, getting my degree, but also challenging me to continue to do the things I was doing that made a difference in our library because of the impact that it was having on young children and young people in the community, the outreach I was doing, the exposure to people about the value of libraries and the profession, how rewarding this profession was to be able to make such a difference in the world through the books and programs and services and outreach to our community. So there are people who inspire me and even today that are still my mentors. As old as I am, I still have mentors that encourage me to do things. And I just segued from going to the library every day to teaching Black studies at the college that I've been teaching at York College since 2001, the responsibility to reach out to our young people and share this history and culture of who we are in spite of the years of enslavement that we've had. If it wasn't for our people, America wouldn't be what it is today. That's a fact. That's a fact.
That's a big fact. It's hidden. They say you hide things in books, and it's glad that it's okay. They can hide it. We're gonna come and build it up. We're gonna get our own books. We're gonna expose these books and these different characters and the different histories that we have. And I'm myself. I'm a first generation immigrant, right? So my parents are not rooted in American culture. They're not rooted in Black American history. They came from Haiti and they knew that existence and came here and were focused on the prize of making it and making their kids make it. So, and I've told people that a lot recently that, when it comes to first generation immigrants, we lose a little because we don't know about Black history off top. We have to learn it in the schools we're going to. We have to get it from our friends. And most of us get it once we're beyond the teen years, most of us. And so it's good to know that we can find a place and actually get that knowledge now, today, right away. Especially, I'm imagining what the digital collection looks like.
Fortunately, because of the pandemic and things translating from face to face, going to the library to being on digital collections and virtual learning, there's a lot more resources available online than people even take for granted. You can go on YouTube and find videos about almost anything that you want to learn about, or any topic you want to learn about, any persons you want to learn about. There's information in YouTube and online. So that handheld device that you call a cell telephone, um,
Mm,
the computer, the laptop, the computer, the desk, all of those things, the resources are there. Frederick Douglass, there are two phrases and quotes that I use from Frederick Douglass with my students. One is knowledge makes a person unfit for slavery. Knowledge makes a person unfit for slavery. And one that I just read, an illiterate crowd is the easiest to rule. An illiterate
mm,
crowd is the easiest to rule because if somebody else is always telling you about your history, that's their version of your history. The only
mm,
way you know whether that truth is valid is if you do your own research, you do your own reading. And one of the things I tell my students, you can go through this course, but the best way to pass this course is read the book. Reading is a revolutionary act. Reading is a revolutionary act. So if you want to be an activist, you want to be bad, you want to be Black Lives Matter, read. The more
facts.
you read, the more you know. The more you know, the more you will change your concept of who you are. When you look in the mirror and you see that proud Black face, you be that proud Black face because you see yourself in history. You see a reflection of who you are and who your ancestors were. If you think you go through hell today, imagine what your ancestors went through so you could be here today. You know, that this is, we learn about America, but when America was designed, and we go to the Constitution of the United States, and the Declaration of Independence talks about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our ancestors could not pursue life. They had no liberty, and they were unable to pursue happiness because they were enslaved private property. You have that right today. You have the right to go to school. You have the right to get an education. And if the teachers aren't teaching you Black history and they're only doing it 1 month of the year, that doesn't mean you shouldn't learn it yourself.
Mm,
Don't wait for your teachers to teach you. Take that information to the school and then ask them, why aren't you teaching me this in my class? Start to become an activist student and demand, just like the Black Studies programs in colleges was based on the Black Power movement, demanding that Black studies be a curriculum in the college education community. It changed education. It created Black studies and Africana studies. Our history is American history. And without the contributions that we made, look, go in your computer and pull up Black inventions. You're going to see hundreds of inventions that we made that many of you never heard of, you never thought of, you never realized that Black people invented these things because they don't want you to know that. So the question is, if they don't want you to know that, it must be important,
mm,
must be relevant.
facts. So true. So you tied in my next question. I wanted to ask you why were you or why are you an activist librarian, and what does that term mean, and how do you express that?
Well, let me respond this way. When's the last time you heard a librarian talk like I do?
Never.
That's why I'm a librarian. I inherited this title of being an activist librarian from my mentor, E.J. Josie, who created the Black Caucus of the American Library Association, who challenged the American Library Association about the policies and procedures where they were holding conferences and said, this is disrespectful to Black people. How can you hold conferences in Mississippi and Louisiana and Black librarians go there, they can't stay in the hotels, they can't go to the meetings, they're disrespected, and they're not allowed to be treated like a professional librarian. His activism in the 1960s and 70s is the same activism that I bring to the profession today as a librarian and then as a professor of Black studies.
Ooh, heat. I call it heat. We need that. Professor of Black Studies. So your college, you're a professor of Black Studies and also professor of library science.
At Queens College.
I'm
I
sorry.
teach Black
What did I
studies
say? You?
at college. I teach library science at Queens College in the library science program.
Okay, okay. So how is that for you? That's what you're doing right now. What is that like for you every day, day in, day out? Especially with like we just said, everything's pretty much a lot of things are virtual.
Um, I admit I do not like teaching virtually. I love teaching my students face to face. I love the interaction one on one with my students. But this is a transitionary period. This is something we're forced to do. I'm learning more and more how to use this technology. prior to last March, the technology was a tool that assisted us in doing what we do. It assisted me in doing the work I did at the library. It made things more communication. It gave me access to more information quicker. But now we're dependent on the computer and technology to be educators and to be librarians. So we have to, now we're being forced to learn the technology more proficiently so we can be more effective in what we do. So I don't like teaching virtually, but I love teaching. I love sharing information. I love challenging minds. I love waking up students with information. I love the fact that for the first 2 or 3 weeks of the semester, we just finished the first week in the spring semester, students are saying, why did we learn this in high school? Why did we learn about Africa when we were in high school? Why did we learn about the early African civilizations? Because they don't want you to learn this. So this is the door that you need to open up and learn because it's your history. And then the connectedness, the history of the Caribbean connected to the history of Africa. No matter where you are in the Caribbean, all of those cultures that are part of the Caribbean are there because of the transatlantic slave trade. So the fact that you speak English is not your native tongue. Your native tongue was an African tongue they didn't want you to have. Spanish wasn't your native tongue. That was a language that was brought there by the Spanish, Portuguese, the British, the French. So we have to learn about that connectedness and the same connectedness with Central and South America. There was slave. In fact, there were more slaves taken to Brazil than they were taken to the United States. That history in the Central and South America is connected to our history. We are all related. All the cultures that come out of Central South America and the Caribbean are part of a connected family that goes back to African ancestry. But we are so divided from each other because that's a colonized way to divide and conquer. So we have to learn, if we get together and we learn about the history of our combined history, we look at our culture, we look at our music, we look at our religions, you're going to find a common thread. And that makes us
Definitely.
that makes us family. So we are all family. And I love the fact that we have this multicultural fabric that's called the African of African ancestry.
Yes, I love it. It's a lot of work to do. We all have more to do to catch up on what we lost, what we don't know. Sometimes I just want to dig and dig and dig and find out more. When it comes to my Black history, my African history, it stops at Haiti. We have a clue what country our people came from. I tell people I'm from Benin. I'm Haitian. Um, and I said, all right, my people came from Benin because that's what I've been looking at and seeing as a connection to Benin. I'm claiming it because I feel like I need to claim something and start learning about it and let it just manifest into my life and see if I get smarter or something, right?
Well, it makes you smarter in the sense that it gives you another thread of connectedness to your past. I did my DNA study several years ago because I always wanted to know where did my family come from the African continent. My family, my parents and my grandparents were born and raised in Vicksburg, Mississippi. But I knew that's not where our ancestors begin. And I did my own DNA study. So I know that my mother's side of the family comes from Cameroon, and my father's side of the family comes from Gabon, both West African countries. So I have a connectedness to the thread of the African continent. I've been to Africa twice, and I was supposed to go again last year, but got, with the COVID, couldn't travel. Been to Ghana twice and belonged to 2 different villages in the African continent. I've stayed in the villages and got to know African people there and learn more about African culture. And went to the slave dungeons and saw what the dungeons that we built that we were enslaved in and the horrors that come out of that slave trade. And then when I went back the last time, stood on the shores of the Atlantic Ocean on the African ocean, right on the shores of Africa, and saw the last sight that my ancestors saw when they were forced on a slave ship and came to the New World, whatever that was, but they never were able to go home. My going back to Africa closed that cycle. When they walked that last gate coming out of the slave dungeon, there was a sign of saying the door of no return, because they never would return. My going back and staying there and doing the things I did with Africa was a door of return. And now the cycle is complete for my ancestry. But it also means that I have made my part of my mission to go back to the continent. Most of our people never go to Africa. They go to the Caribbean, they go to Hawaii, they go to Florida, they go to Europe, they go to Central South of Mexico, America, they go to Mexico, but they never go back home. All other cultures, when they say I'm going home, they go back to their home country. We've been raised to be ashamed of being African. We've been raised to not want to be African. We want to be everything else but African.
But African.
We are African. You can't take that out of your DNA. And the irony is, if you do a DNA study, everybody's DNA has a strand from Africa because the first human beings on this planet were born in Africa, in East Africa. So all of us are African, but we are
Yes.
conditioned to be everything else but African. So I am an African born and raised in America. You are an African Caribbean. You are an African Haitian. You are still African.
Yes.
And until you learn about the things that, I mean, African civilizations go back thousands of years before Europe even came into existence. So what did the African civilizations do before Europe got here? We weren't sitting here saying, well, in about 3,000 years, the white man will be, we'll sit here and wait for them to get here. No. Civilization was created by African civilization. The first universities were on the African continent. The pyramids were built. What skills and talents does it take to build the pyramids that are still there today? Math, science, chemistry, physics, astronomy. That wasn't done by ignorant people. They weren't done by savages.
Nope.
Built the pyramids. They're still trying to understand how ancient civilizations could build the pyramids, and they're still there. There's paint on the walls in the pyramids that's just as fresh today as it was thousands of years ago. You paint it today, 5 years later, it has to be repainted. Now,
True.
so but if you're never taught that history, then you believe that you have no history. Carter G. Woodson, the founder of Black History Month, once said, if a race has no history, if it has no worthwhile traditions, it becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world and stands in danger of being exterminated. And that's what happens with us. We believe we have no history because we've never been taught that history. So if I was going to change the American system, if I was going to make a change today that would help to eliminate the racism and the inequities that we find in society, I would change the American educational system. If you start teaching not only Black history, but the history of all cultures in the educational system, when you study world history, when you study American history, and you study the contributions that all cultures make to this civilization called America, you will see that all of us made contributions, valuable contributions, heralded contributions, and that everything was not done by white people. You'd be surprised how much was not done by white people and what we accomplished even when we were enslaved. That gives you a whole different understanding. So by the time you graduate high school, your worldview is different. Your respect of all cultures is different. Your respect for Black people is different. Your respect for Africa is different. And you won't have this divided hate that goes on in our society today because America doesn't want you to know who you are. You're not just an American. America is a land of immigrants. The only people that are not immigrants are the indigenous population. And they didn't call themselves Indians. They had other names. So if all of us are part of this fabric called America, you have to look at the Constitution. You have to look at the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. What happened to women? So you have to, when you start to dissect and inspect those documents, those founding documents, you learn that the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution were written by slave owners. That the first 12 presidents of the United States were slave owners.
Slave owners.
Who signed the Constitution were slave owners. So when they created this country, it was designed for rich white men, slave owners, that designated Black people as 3/5 of a human being as private property to be bought and sold at will. That's the Constitution. Constitution designates that the international slave trade was legitimate through 1808. 20 years.
Wow.
20 years from the date it was written, so they legitimized the transatlantic slave trade. That's the industry that brought millions of Black people from the continent through the Caribbean here.
Now,
Constitution.
just to cut in, millions of people that made it, and it probably was three times that many that didn't make it across that water, that died along the way,
Right,
or they jumped for their lives into the Atlantic Ocean.
right.
Um, so
Can't
we're lucky that we're here.
accurate count because you don't know how many people the bodies of African people are lying between the African continent and the Caribbean and the African continent and the east coast of the United States.
Oh, fire!
Going
Thank you.
going back what 2 years ago, the 1619 project with the New York Times. That if you get access to that project, I have a copy of it here, and it took me a while to find it because it was so popular during that period. There are schools, and I just saw it on the news this morning. There are schools in the Midwest that are trying to pass legislation to exempt that teaching that from the 1619 project in the schools without students because they don't want the students to know their Black history.
I think I heard something, if not yesterday, then Friday, where I think one of the southern states, Mississippi or near Mississippi, is literally trying to ban that in the school, that it can't be taught in the school system, which is kind of weird.
Right.
Um, Truth is truth. If it's truthful, it can be shared. If it's a lie, I can understand, but we all know it's not a lie.
It's all based on fact. It's all based on truth. You know. Then
Wow.
I use a book by John Henry Cloak by John Hope Franklin. Um, from Slavery to Freedom. Open it up. From Slavery to Freedom. I love this book, and there are many different books. The newest one that I just found recently, that's an excellent book also. It's called Freedom on My Mind. And what I love about both of these books, there are a lot of books called Introduction to Black Studies, but they're chapters. They're chopped up about incidents and segments of Black history. Both of these books are written as if it was a long story. And it's written as a story from the beginning all the way through the Obama administration and now into the current administration and Black Lives Matter. This is our story. And this is based on research and fact. So when I teach my students, I want them to realize it's not just a chapter. It's not something that you just make people aware of and introduce them to them in February. If I could change anything, it would be to change Dr. Woodson's concept of making Black History Month in February. I put Black History Month in September, start the school year off. Dr. Prodigy Woodson selected February because it housed the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, and the interaction that they had in forming that part of that abolitionist movement during the slavery days. That's why February was selected. But if I could change it, I put it in September. So you start the school year off learning about Black history and then having those questions asked that are going to be now part of the curriculum for the rest of the school year.
The rest of the year. That makes sense. Makes sense. I hope you're fighting for that. How do we get that done? But you don't have to answer that.
Well, first thing, if you're not going to get that change, you got to get what's changed is how history is taught in the school system. I ask my students. We just finished the first week of the semester, and students are saying, "Well, I graduated in high school. My high school didn't even celebrate, didn't even recognize Black History Month." Or every year we get the same thing over and over. I learned about Martin Luther King. I learned about Malcolm X. I learned about Rosa Parks. We get talked about Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. There's more than those five heroes and sheroes in history. And what I get frustrated with is even when they know who Dr. King is, he was a minister who was the leader of the civil rights movement. They don't have any idea what Martin Luther King's dream is. Because I get students that say, everybody dreams. How come he gets a holiday because he dreams? So they don't know what Martin Luther King's dream is. They have no idea what Martin Luther King was talking about when he talked about the other America. You want to read something interesting? Read The Other American, an essay, a sermon, a message that Dr. King wrote and gave about the other America. Malcolm X, they'll say, well, I've heard of Malcolm 10, but I want to know who the other 9 were, because they don't understand the concept of the X representing the unknown. The unknown is that what his last name would have been if he had not been given the slave name Little. So they don't know who Malcolm is. They don't know the connectedness between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. They don't know who W.B. Du Bois is. They have no idea who Paul
Mm.
Robeson is. Harriet Tubman was one of the conductors of the Underground Railroad. But you have any idea what it was like to go back into slavery to free people, and what it took to free those people? She used to say, "I could have freed more people if they had only known they were slaves."
Wow.
And she had a
Wow.
bounty on her head. So there's so much more to learn. People are just learning who Representative John Lewis was, who died last year.
I'm one of those people, sadly.
You can't talk about the civil rights movement and not see John Lewis's face, or hear
Hmm.
about what he did with Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. As a young 23-year-old, he spoke at the March on Washington. He challenged the system. He raised his voice. All the students that sat in, all the children, Ruby Bridges, a little girl who had to be marched into school so she could get an education when she was a child. All of those people are part of our history that people never hear about. They never learn
They don't-
about.
It's like they don't want us to really see the nitty gritty fighters for the cause, the nitty gritty thinkers for the cause, the people who plan, because you can't do anything without a plan. And someone has to sit in that back room, and two people at least have to get together and say, let's strategize and let's plot our freedom, let's plot our education. And like you said, they hide this stuff from my. I'm one of those people that are guilty of not knowing a lot until someone passes away, or I meet someone like yourself, and you drop these jewels on me, and it's like, how do we fight for that access? How do we fight for that for our kids?
The most valuable, the most dangerous student is a student who reads and a student who thinks and asks questions. If you just sit there, man, I remember listening to people tell my sister, I was not a great student in public school. I became a great student in college. But my sister would get A's, and so kids would tease her, "Oh, you think you're white because you get A's. You read all the time." So what you're telling me is, what you just told me is, in order to be black and cool, I should get C's and D's and F's. No, no, that's what you just said. How can you
Mm.
gotta be white because you? How can you gotta be white because you speak proper English? Why do you have to be white because you get A's and B's in school? I mean, that's what they don't want you to do. When I used to go back and forth to Rikers Island to talk to the brothers and sisters there, I tell them the Creator did not put you on this planet to spend your life in prison. They want you. We need you at home. So the
Yes.
lives that our people live, the challenges that we've overcome. One, education was the tool out of freedom to keep us from voting. The Mississippi Plan and the Louisiana Act in 1890 designated a poll tax. Now, people coming out of slavery had to pay a poll tax. How can you pay a poll tax with money you don't have if you've been enslaved all your life and never got paid for the work? Then they came up with literacy tests. You have to be able to read, and you have to interpret the state constitution of Louisiana in order to be able to register to vote. Now, the laws, which is what the state constitution is, are argued in court by the college degreed lawyers on the interpretation of the law. So how are you and I, who are just coming out of slavery and can barely read, maybe just barely illiterate, supposed to interpret the Constitution to your satisfaction, and the person on the other side of the table who's designated when you can or cannot register to vote is probably less literate than you are? That's to keep you from voting. And then the grandfather clause. If your grandfather could vote in 1867, when we were still barely coming out of slavery, if your grandfather could vote, then you can vote. Those are all things that keep us from getting power. Power,
Mm.
power of the ballot, as Malcolm called it, being able to vote and have a voice in who represents us, having a voice in our communities and what happens in the future of our people. That's power. And the way to keep you from having power is to make it illegal for you to learn how to read, make it illegal for you to learn how to register to vote, and make it illegal for you to voice your impressions when it comes to the voting booth and electing your own candidates. So that's why I say reading is a revolutionary act.
I just want to, while we brought up the word voting, In my neighborhood, we have a runoff, a special election coming up. So I want to all the youth and anyone else that's listening, if you're not registered to vote, get registered to vote. You have options of voting. Now we have things such as early voting, where for 2 weeks before a regular election day, you can't go vote and not worry about a crowd. I just requested my absentee ballot 2 days ago, and it came in the mail so fast. I'm like, okay, now I have my other option. Even though I traditionally go on election day, I haven't done early voting. Um, Get registered to vote. Find out why it's important to vote. Can you imagine 10% of the population deciding who represents all of the population? That's what's at stake for everyone. If only 10 of us out of 100 go vote, whoever wins that election represents 100 people. It doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem balanced.
And look at all the things that were done by 45's administration to suppress our power at the ballot booth. Discrediting, no use of early voting, no early ballots. They changed the balloting place so you wouldn't know where to vote. All of those to keep you from practicing your right to vote, your privilege under the Constitution, but also to defect your power and
Yes.
themselves in office so that they can make changes that affect you negatively. Don't give your power away. Powerful people never teach powerless people how to take their power from them. So you have to do that on your own. Reading, voting, being active, making your voice heard, participate, not just demonstrating, but doing something after the demonstration, making a difference. The revolution doesn't start out in the streets. The revolution starts here.
Mm,
This is where the revolution
mm.
starts. You got to change your mind before you can go out in the streets and change the world.
I so agree. I concur. I signed that contract to change my mind. I woke up January 24th, 2016 with a determination. And it's brought me to a point today where I'm able to interact with our youth more often and get to do things like this. And it's exactly what you said. Change our mind and use our mind, and then let everything else flow from that. And I'm glad that I'm able to walk in the words that you just said that we have to do. And it means so much when you could be someone that's giving someone else a chance to be better, to learn more, and to be great.
I'm not sure how much time we have left, but I definitely want to make sure that I share this poem. I heard this poem for the first time probably in the early mid 1980s. And I went to Boys and Girls High School and I saw this poem written on a wall and I wrote it down because it was so powerful. And years later, I've been sharing this poem since 1985 with every audience that I speak with. And maybe 12, 13, 15 years ago, the poet Bernard J. Keller, who's a Harlem based poet, heard that I'd been sharing this poem and contacted me and sent me a signed copy and thanked me for sharing this poem. And this
Right.
poem is entitled Harvard 8985. And I dedicate this to all the young people who are listening to us now or all the young people who might hear it in the future. Harvard 8985 by Bernard J. Keller. He says, if you cannot be the best for yourself, do it for those who would deny the opportunity to be the best. If you cannot fight the fight for yourself, do it for those who fought the wars but without weapons. If you cannot dream the dream for yourself, dream it for those who could dream but could never make their dreams come true. If you cannot love you for yourself, love you for those who loved you even as they stepped off the slave ships into a new world or stood against those who said that they were not men or women. If you cannot be proud for yourself, be proud for those who use pride to sustain themselves when they were sentenced to ride in the back of the bus or braid the wild dogs and open fire hoses in order to cast their vote for a candidate of their choice. Do it for yourself if you can, but whenever you cannot do it for yourself, do it for those whose names that you will never know. Do it for all those in your family who had college degrees, but they couldn't get that promotion or get that job just because of the color of their skin. Do it for those whose names may not ever be in the New York Times or on the Time magazine or on Newsday or Newsweek, who contributed and sacrificed so that your life could be better than theirs. Do it for yourself, but whenever you cannot do it for yourself, do it for them. Peace and blessings.
Uh, I fought back a tear, man. I had to hold it in. I pushed it back in, but that, yes. Thank you for that. If you could give us the name of that poem again.
Harvard 8985, and the poet is Bernard J. Keller, Keller.
Thank you so much. That was dope. I guess I definitely want to end with this last question. How does one become a librarian with impact? And I ask this because we're going to have a huge teen audience, and we like to keep them focused on the prize of growth. So, how does one become a librarian with impact?
First, you have to have a sense of self. You have to have a pride in who you are, no matter what culture you come from. You have to be willing to make a change and make a difference. And you can't be afraid of making mistakes. Mistakes are just stumbling blocks to success. You learn more from your mistakes than you do from your successes. Failure is not an option because you never fail. If I don't do well in something, it didn't mean that I failed. It means I have to do better in preparation, or I have to study harder, or I have to find another approach to make it happen. Being effective as a librarian, as I think I have, as I hope I am, as I hope I am, because my mission is to make a change in the profession. My mission is to change the lives of all the students who walk in my class. I tell my students, I don't care what grade you get at the end of the semester. When you leave this classroom, you will come back, you will end it with a completely different mindset. You will look at things differently. You will be exposed to a history that becomes your history and your knowledge and your base to change the world, make a difference.
Wow. Thank you, Brother Andrew Jackson, Mr. Sekou. Um, you just gave us a lot of insights during this conversation. It's Black History Month 2021. We're going through different times. I don't think it's been the most turbulent times in Black history, but it's a time of awakening in Black history. It's a time of economic empowerment in Black history. And it's a time for us all to really connect and keep this momentum going forward, and build upon the legacies that you have built. I got to figure out how to add to the Langston Youth Culture Community Center. That's my mission now, to turn around and say I need to visit digitally or in person. Then I need to figure out how can I engage with my kids and the community's kids, bring them from my side of town. I'm in Rosedale, Queens. I need to get them to Corona to see this amazing institution that's here, and it's here for us, to be great and to do good. And I thank you for that.
They also have a valuable Black Heritage collection at the Roosevelt Public Library in Long Island, also. And
Yes,
I
I didn't mention that.
did a consultant assignment there for 5 years and helped to develop some of the programs and services they have. But they have a very rich Black Heritage collection, and the curator there is Carol Gilliam. And she will be glad to introduce you to Black history and culture through the programs and definitely the collection there at Roosevelt. The new curator at the Langston Hughes Library is Christine Zarrett, Zarrett. And the phone number at Langston Hughes Library is 718-651-7116. And the address is 100-01 Northern Boulevard in Corona, Queens.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jackson. Thank you for celebrating Black History with Elmont Library with me and imparting your wisdom once again. I appreciate the time we well spent. I look forward to connecting with you. I'm gonna hold myself accountable to that statement.
Anytime, but as I tell my students, every day is Black History Day, every month is Black History Month, so it doesn't have to be done just in February. I prefer it's done outside of February when everybody else is doing it. Do it when nobody's thinking of Black history.
That's right. We're gonna end it with that. Happy Black History Month, and thank you.
Blessings.
Blessings.